In today's video, we're breaking down one of the most insane underdog victories in history, when a few thousand English archers annihilated an army of elite French knights. From hopeless odds to absolute triumph, this battle is still studied as one of the greatest upsets ever recorded. We'll cover how it happened, what changed because of it, and for the sauce, a funny fact to surprise your friends: how the famous two-finger salute was created. Stick around, this is a history lesson your school teachers wish they could have taught. August 26, 1346. On a rain-soaked field near Crécy, France, 9,000 bone-tired Englishmen stand ready to meet 30,000 of Europe's most elite knights. The French hold every conceivable edge: overwhelming numbers, devastating heavy cavalry, the finest noble warriors the continent can muster. Their confidence runs so high that French aristocrats are literally bickering over who gets the honor of killing England's king. 4 hours pass. When the smoke clears, 1,500 French nobles lie dead in the mud. Princes, dukes, even kings among them. English casualties? 40 men, not 400. 40. 5 centuries of armored knight supremacy ended that afternoon, brought down by common peasants armed with little more than wood and string. The blind king of Bohemia rode straight into certain death rather than miss the fight. French knights stampeded over their own allies in panicked retreat. The Genoese crossbowmen were butchered by the very French nobles paying their wages. And in the weeks that followed, crows gorged themselves on noble corpses until they were too heavy to take flight. This is Crécy, where medieval combat breathed its last, where the notion that noble birth meant battlefield superiority shattered against reality, and where the 100 Years' War truly ignited with France's most crushing humiliation. By this video's end, you'll grasp how a weapon costing 10 shillings demolished armor valued at £1,000, why French knights slaughtered their own hired soldiers mid-battle, and how one blind monarch's death charge became the most gloriously insane final stand in military history. Before we get into it, just a quick thing. If you love medieval history, insane underdog victories, and stories that flip the entire idea of warfare on its head, hit like and subscribe. Let's make this global. Drop your city and what time it is where you're watching. Let's see how far across time zones this army reaches. And for my French viewers, I just started learning the language. If I butcher a name or city, correct me in the comments, I'll appreciate it. Alright, grab a drink, get comfortable, and settle in. Because this isn't just another medieval story. This is the day common archers brought down the might of European nobility. This is the Battle of Crécy. Let me paint the scene for this bloodbath. Edward III of England had just hit Normandy shores with roughly 15,000 troops, claiming France's crown through his mother's lineage. He'd been torching his path across northern France in what they called a chevauchée, essentially sanctioned pillaging meant to demonstrate the French king's inability to shield his subjects. Fresh from sacking Caen, the English were racing toward English-controlled Calais when the French forces finally cornered them. Philip II of France had gathered Christendom's largest fighting force, somewhere between 30,000 and 35,000 warriors, including 12,000 heavy cavalry, knights wrapped in full-plate armor astride armored warhorses. This wasn't just France's military. This represented every significant French noble, plus allied monarchs and princes from throughout Europe. The Holy Roman Empire dispatched forces. Bohemia's king arrived with his full retinue. Majorca sent knights. Picture a medieval super team. And they were all thirsting for English blood. French knights were medieval warfare's equivalent of tanks. A fully armored knight mounted on an armored destrier weighed close to a ton. They'd been groomed for war from infancy, drilling in combat before they could properly walk. Their armor's cost exceeded what an entire peasant village might earn across generations. For half a millennium, heavy cavalry charges had determined European battles' outcomes. Infantry existed merely to be crushed. Archers were irritants. True warriors, noble warriors, fought with steel on horseback. Edward III understood that his situation looked hopeless. Outnumbered 3-1, worn down from weeks of raiding, supplies running thin. Yet he possessed something the French dismissed entirely: 5,000 Welsh and English longbowmen, predominantly peasants and convicts, who'd been training with their bows since youth because English law demanded it. Every Sunday following church services, English males were legally required to practice archery. Playing other sports when you could be training with a bow was literally criminal. The longbow itself was remarkably simple. A 6-foot length of yew wood, nothing elaborate, but in skilled hands, absolutely lethal. These archers could plant 12 arrows per minute into targets at 250 yards, one arrow every 5 seconds, accurately, across the length of 2.5 football fields. The draw weight was so brutal, 150 to 180 pounds, that modern archaeologists identify longbowmen's remains by their malformed skeletons. Their left arms grew inches longer than their right from years of sustaining that massive draw weight. The French knew this, and they had a solution for captured English archers. They'd cut off the 2 fingers used to draw the bowstring. Without those fingers, an archer could never threaten them again. This practice became so feared that English archers would raise those 2 fingers in defiance before battle, showing the French they were still intact, still deadly. That gesture? It survives today as the British 2-finger salute. Edward positioned his forces on elevated ground near Crécy, forcing the French into an uphill assault. He arranged his troops in 3 divisions with archers forming a V formation between them, establishing overlapping kill zones. Then he made a move that stunned both armies. He ordered his knights to dismount and fight on foot. English nobility fighting like common infantry? Unprecedented. But Edward grasped something the French couldn't fathom. The era of the mounted knight was dying. Edward's command to dismount sent shockwaves rippling through his own ranks. These men had spent their lives preparing for the thunderous glory of the charge. Their war horses valued beyond gold. Standing down to fight like commoners felt like spitting on centuries of tradition. Yet Edward pressed the issue, emphasizing that survival outweighed pride. Gradually, knights clad in gleaming plate began slogging through mud alongside archers in rough wool, sight unprecedented in Christendom. The English camp maintained an eerie calm the night before battle. Archers prepped their yew bows, working beeswax into bowstrings to waterproof them. Stakes were pounded into earth while ditches were carved out by torchlight. Chronicles record that Edward even distributed meat and ale, ensuring his men slept on full bellies while the French army stumbled exhausted into camp after their forced march. Every detail screamed discipline, confronting arrogance. The English also weaponized the terrain itself. They excavated ditches and holes before their position to disrupt cavalry charges. They drove sharpened stakes into the ground at angles designed to skewer horses. They transformed the landscape into a slaughterhouse while the French were still approaching. Then they waited. Meanwhile, on the French side, chaos masqueraded as pageantry. Nobles paraded past each other in brilliant armor, banners cracking in the breeze, each attempting to outshine the next. Dukes and counts openly squabbled over who'd earn the privilege of leading the charge or capturing Edward alive for ransom. Some boasted they'd parade England's king back in chains before sunset. Philip VI's attempts to restore order drowned beneath the cacophony of trumpets and bragging. The army resembled less a disciplined force than a tournament gone mad. When dawn broke on August 26, the French vanguard marched through the devastation of Edward's chevauchée. Villages still smoldered. Crops lay blackened. Livestock scattered. Peasants whispered curses watching thousands of armored knights pass their destroyed homes. The French nobility saw humiliation that demanded immediate vengeance. The English saw confirmation their devastation strategy was working. Philip VI's army reached Crécy around 400 August 26, exhausted from extensive marching. The intelligent move would have been resting and attacking at dawn. Philip actually ordered a halt, but French nobility didn't do patience. They spotted the English on that ridge, outnumbered, weary, far from home, and smelled glory. Every noble craved being the one who killed or captured Edward III. By mid-afternoon, storm clouds massed overhead. A sudden downpour drenched the field. French knights laughed, confident their plate armor would shield them. But the storm held vastly different implications for missile troops. The English calmly unstrung their bows, tucking strings beneath helmets and cloaks, preserving dryness. The Genoese crossbowmen took no such precautions. Their strings stretched and went slack, useless compared to the taut yew of the longbow. A minor detail, a few moments of preparation, would determine thousands of fates. When Philip VI finally surveyed the field and saw the English calmly arrayed on the slope, banners rippling, formations tight, he ordered his forces to wait until morning. But knights don't wait. Behind him, counts and dukes surged forward, shouting that daylight was wasting and glory was slipping away. Some had already lowered their lances. The king's authority evaporated. The French army ceased being an army. It became a mob of impatient aristocrats refusing to let discipline interfere with vanity. The Battle of Crécy had commenced, not through strategy, but through pride spiraling catastrophically out of control. The French vanguard ignored Philip's commands and began advancing. Once certain nobles pushed forward, others followed, desperate not to miss the glory. The king lost control of his own forces before combat even properly began. What unfolded next wasn't a battle, it was an aristocratic stampede toward annihilation. First came the Genoese crossbowmen, roughly 5,000 of them, the premier mercenary missile troops money could secure. But problems immediately emerged. Their pavises, large shields they'd shelter behind while reloading, remained with the baggage train miles back. They'd advance without cover. Additionally, the recent rainstorm created another crisis. While the English had kept bowstrings dry beneath helmets, the Genoese crossbow strings were soaked and stretched, drastically reducing range. The Genoese advanced to roughly 150 yards and loosed a volley. Most bolts dropped short. Then the English answered. 5,000 longbows released simultaneously. Witnesses described the sound as resembling thunder. The sky literally blackened with arrows. Each archer was loosing 12 per minute. That's 60,000 arrows per minute raining down on the Genoese. The crossbowmen had no shields, no cover, and their crossbows required 30 seconds to reload versus 5 seconds for a longbow. They were being systematically erased. They broke formation and fled, streaming back toward French lines. And here's where it becomes absolutely insane. The Count d'Alençon, watching the Genoese retreat, bellowed, "Kill me this rabble blocking our way." French knights charged into their own crossbowmen, trampling and cutting them down. They literally massacred their own mercenaries for the offense of not dying quickly enough. The Genoese found themselves trapped between English arrows and French swords. Survivors abandoned the field entirely, cursing their employers. Now came the primary French assault. 12,000 mounted knights thundering uphill through mud over Genoese corpses directly into English arrow storms. This is where we need to discuss what longbow arrows actually accomplished against armor. At extended range, arrows might not pierce quality plate armor directly, but penetration wasn't necessary. They struck horses which, even when armored, had vulnerable points, eyes, mouths, legs. A 1,500-pound warhorse struck by multiple arrows doesn't charge forward, it screams, rears, collapses, creating a 1,500-pound obstacle. Knights behind crashed into fallen mounts. The charge hemorrhaged all momentum. At closer range, under 100 yards, longbow arrows tipped with bodkin points could punch through mail and even plate armor at weak points. They pierced visors into faces, joints into armpits, mail into thighs, but even non-penetrating impacts were devastating. An arrow striking plate armor hit like a hammer blow. Multiple impacts rattled knights inside their armor like dice in a cup. The French attacked in waves, each one climbing over the dead from previous charges. English archers had pre-positioned arrows stuck in the ground before them for rapid access, maintaining continuous fire. Contemporary accounts describe arrows falling like snow, so dense that charging knights couldn't see through the storm. Some French knights actually made it to the English lines. The fighting there was brutal, close-quarters butchery. English men-at-arms with poleaxes, hammers, and daggers dragged dismounted knights into the mud and finished them. The weight that made knights unstoppable on flat ground became their death sentence in the slop and chaos of Crécy's slope. But arrows weren't the only threat. Edward's prepared battlefield now demonstrated its value. Horses hit concealed ditches and shattered legs. Knights crashed into sharpened stakes. Mud from earlier rain transformed into slippery hell. Dismounted knights in 60 pounds of armor could barely maneuver. They became stationary targets. And here's the detail perfectly capturing the horror. English archers depleted their arrow supplies multiple times. Their solution? They sprinted forward into the killing field, yanked arrows from dead and dying French knights and fired them back. The French were being killed with recycled suffering. The blind King John of Bohemia now enters our narrative with the most gloriously insane death in medieval history. John had been blind for a decade, yet came to fight regardless. When he heard the battle was lost, he allegedly declared, "The King of Bohemia does not flee from battle." He commanded his knights to tie their horses' reins to his, so they could guide him into combat. He wanted to strike at least one blow with his sword before death claimed him. This blind 50-year-old monarch charged directly into English lines, swinging his blade at sounds and shadows. He and every knight tethered to him were killed immediately. When they discovered his body, he remained tied to his dead companions, blind eyes open, sword gripped in his hand. He'd achieved his wish. He'd struck an enemy before dying. Edward III's son, the Black Prince, was so moved by this display of courage that he adopted John's personal emblem, ostrich feathers bearing the motto Ich dien, I serve, which remains the Prince of Wales's symbol today. As sunset approached, the French had charged 16 times, 16 separate waves of nobility hurling themselves into the meat grinder. Each charge grew less organized than the previous. French nobles literally fought each other for position at the front, for their chance at glory, only to die in the mud like everyone before them. Philip VI himself charged with the final wave. His horse was killed beneath him. An arrow pierced through his jaw. His bodyguards physically dragged him from the field as he attempted to return to combat. The sacred oriflamme, France's battle standard supposedly guaranteeing victory, was abandoned in the muck. As darkness descended, the English couldn't comprehend their victory. They maintained positions all night, killing any wounded French who stirred. They'd exhausted arrow supplies multiple times and resorted to knives, hammers, and stakes to finish dismounted knights. English peasant archers were literally beating French nobles to death with clubs. When dawn broke on August 27th, the slaughter's true scale revealed itself. The cream of French nobility lay dead in the mud. The Count of Flanders, the Count of Blois, the Duke of Lorraine, the Count of Harcourt, the Count of Sancerre, the list stretched endlessly. 1,500 nobles dead, 11 princes, thousands of lesser knights. The Genoese who hadn't fled were all dead, many killed by their own employers. English losses? Roughly 40 dead, including only 2 knights. 1 English knight lost for every 750 French nobles. The disparity was so extreme contemporary chroniclers refused to believe it. Some claimed divine intervention, but the reality was simpler. The longbow had rendered heavy cavalry obsolete in a single afternoon. But here's the truly devastating aspect. It wasn't merely the deaths, it was who died. Medieval warfare typically involved capturing nobles for ransom. A gentleman's agreement. You didn't kill people worth money. But at Crécy, English archers, common men with zero understanding of or respect for chivalric codes, simply killed everyone. They put arrows through dukes' and counts' faces without knowing or caring about their identities. Noble prisoners who might have been worth thousands of pounds were shot down like dogs. The economic loss alone was staggering. France lost not just fighting men but massive potential ransom income. The psychological impact on European nobility was shattering. For 5 centuries, being a knight meant military superiority. Your noble blood, blessed by God, made you superior in combat to commoners. Crécy proved a Welsh peasant with a stick could kill you just as dead as another knight. The aftermath was grotesque. So many nobles died that insufficient people of appropriate rank existed to bury them properly. Bodies rotted for days. Crows and wolves feasted on princely flesh. Local peasants looted noble corpses, discovering enough wealth to transform their lives. One chronicler noted that peasants who'd never owned more than the clothes on their backs were suddenly wearing noble signet rings and carrying purses of gold. The armor that couldn't save its wearers was melted down and sold. Some estimate the total value of lost armor and equipment exceeded England's annual royal revenue. The English army, exhausted and shocked by their own victory, continued marching toward Calais. They left behind a field so thick with noble corpses that locals renamed it the Field of the Cloth of Gold, for all the expensive garments on the dead. For years afterward, farmers plowing would unearth noble bones and rusted armor. France went into shock. Losing so many nobles in one day created a power vacuum. Entire regions lost their lords. Administrative systems collapsed. The French military required complete restructuring. They began hiring more crossbowmen, building their own archer corps, and most humiliatingly, copying English tactics of fighting dismounted. The Genoese who survived spread word throughout Europe. Don't fight the English in open field. The longbow's reputation became so fearsome that French commanders began refusing battle entirely unless they held overwhelming advantages. The battle also birthed a new warfare paradigm. The dominance of the longbow meant battles became longer-range affairs. The age of glorious cavalry charges was over. Wars became about positioning, preparation, and firepower rather than courage and swordplay. But France didn't learn immediately. 10 years later at Poitiers, they repeated the exact same mistake, charging English archers positioned on a hill with identical results. They lost another king, captured this time, and thousands more nobles. It took the French nearly a century to fully adapt to the new reality that common archers held more battlefield value than noble knights. The social implications ran even deeper. If peasant archers could destroy noble knights, what did that reveal about nobility's divine right? If common Welsh criminals could kill princes, what justified the feudal system? The church scrambled to explain how God's anointed could fall to such low-born weapons. Some clergymen argued the longbow was ungodly, that it killed from distance without honor. But theology couldn't stop arrows. The English longbowmen became Europe's most feared troops. English armies could march through France with impunity for decades. But here's the irony. The longbow's dominance proved temporary. It required lifetime training to use effectively. You couldn't rapidly create longbowmen. When gunpowder weapons arrived, which any peasant could learn to operate in a day, the longbow became obsolete too. By the 1500s, the longbow was a relic, replaced by arquebuses and muskets that required no special strength or years of training. The weapon that killed chivalry was itself killed by progress. The blind king of Bohemia passed into legend. His death charge became seen as the purest expression of chivalric honor, selecting certain death over fleeing, determined to strike one blow for glory despite his blindness. His final stand marked the end of an age when nobility signified something beyond mere wealth, when honor outweighed survival itself. Modern military historians examine Crécy as a revolutionary moment in warfare. It demonstrated that technology and tactics defeat numbers and bravery, that well-prepared defensive ground crushes charging cavalry, that organized firepower overwhelms individual fighting skill. Every core principle of modern warfare revealed itself in that muddy field in 1346. But the most lasting image from Crécy remains this. French knights, the celebrated nobility of Christendom's mightiest kingdom, crushing their own allies beneath hooves in their desperate rush toward glorious death, while English peasants methodically cut them down like shooting practice. The Count d'Alençon, who commanded the slaughter of his own Genoese crossbowmen, took an arrow through his face mere moments afterward. The French ended up killing more of their own forces than the English. The crows that fed on noble bodies became so engorged on aristocratic flesh that witnesses reported they couldn't take flight. They'd waddle from corpse to corpse, too heavy with meat to lift off. A perfect symbol, even nature's scavengers couldn't handle the sheer volume of fallen nobility. Today a modest monument stands at Crécy's field. Few tour buses make a stop there. Most people have never even heard the name. Yet on August 26, 1346, on that rain-soaked hillside, the medieval age breathed its last. The English didn't simply claim victory at Crécy. They demonstrated that courage couldn't overcome cold calculation, that noble birth couldn't deflect arrows, and that the knight's era was drawing to a close. France lost far more than aristocrats that day. They lost their fundamental conception of reality itself, and the instrument of that devastation? 5,000 peasants who practiced archery every Sunday after church.